YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to talk a little bit about the books that I read in November. I had an astoundingly successful reading month. It was nonfiction November and I read a few novels as well as a short story collection. And I had such a wonderful time reading in November that even though it's the middle of the next month, I still want to talk a little bit about the books that I read. I've already filmed 2 videos where I recommended some of the nonfiction books that I read in the beginning of November. But here in this video, I want to do a little bit more of a complete look at all the books. So I'll start with this one since the little one wants to play with it. I talked about The Patriots by Winston, Groom. This is about Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams and the making of America. How these 3 men, how their lives intersected and how their relationship impacted the start of the country as we now know it. What I really loved about this book was that Alexander Hamilton's story is the one that we look at first. And he was an immigrant. He was coming from the Caribbean, came to the United States as a young man with a lot of potential, but I just love the fact that in this time, United States, it was the United States then, but that this country, this land, was open to people coming from other places and being instrumental in working towards the betterment of everyone. And so I love that his story is the one that starts this book, and you know, we see the impact that he made on life as we now know it. So this one I talked about in a previous video. I also talked about Ann Druyan's Cosmos in a previous video. So I'll link those videos down below in case you want to hear a little bit more about these books. And Ann Druyan was married to Carl Sagan, and together, while Carl Sagan was alive, they worked on this production for National Geographic about the cosmos. And so this book is Ann Druyan carrying on that legacy and talking about our universe, our world as we know it, and the future of our world and what it will be like if we don't do anything. So in this book, she talks about life. And she talks about the physical world, but she also talks about climate change. She talks about our intellectual world. And I love the facts that are included in this book. There's a wealth of information that maybe you know but didn't know everything about. Like, I've heard the term Zoroastrian, but in this book, Ann Druyan explains what the Zoroastrian culture and belief system is all about. So I love this book. I love what I learned about life from reading this one, and highly recommend the book, and also recommend that you check out my video where I talk a little bit more about that book as well. Other books that I have talked about, read and talked about, I talked about Lab Girl by Jahren. And Lab Girl is a memoir. I got this book as a gift from Doris from all the books, and I should mention the previous 2 books were gifts from the publishers. Both of them came from National Geographic publishers. Lab Girl, however, is a memoir, and Jahren is a paleobiologist, and so she talks about her life and she talks about her work as a scientist. And what I really love about this book is that while a lot of the book is kind of harsh, she's talking about the harsh reality of being a female scientist and not really being acknowledged by a lot of people in her field, because you know, there's still a lot of discrimination being experienced by women in the sciences. And she talks about how hard it was to build her lab and get funding, and you know, living with this certainty that you know what you want to do, even though you may not know all the details of what you want to study, but you know what you want to do in general. And at every point, you still have to be selling that to the people who will fund you. And no matter how much money you get, it's never enough to do all the things. And so she has this man in her lab who is a close friend. They've been working together for many years, and so they've become friends, but she's... She talks about how difficult it is just assure him of a continuing salary because of the difficulty of getting funding for her research. The other thing that I really love about this book So that was one. I didn't talk about the thing that I love. The thing that I love about the book, even though it's harsh going, in the beginning of the book, like I guess I can't remember if it's a prologue, she tells you kind of how the book ends. She tells you that she has a family, and even though most of the book you don't see her living in this space where she'll be able to have a family, it's wonderful knowing not how the story ends, but how it proceeds and how it, yeah. I love knowing that there is happiness coming. So, Lab Girl. The other thing that I really love about the book is that she interweaves her memoir with facts about trees and about plant life. And she shows you how, I mean, we're learning a lot about plant life in this book, but she also shows you the overlap between her research and what she learns about life and what she learns about what she hopes that you will also learn about life. It's a wonderful book. I would love to put it on other people's radar as well. So that's 3 books that I've read and talked about previously. I have more books that I've read and talked about. Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. There is a lot that has been said about this book, so I'm not going to go into details. Caste is Isabel Wilkerson talking about the racial hierarchy that exists in the United States of America. A lot of it is the continuing vestiges of slavery. The system that was set up in order to allow slavery to start and to continue, where white was pitted against black. And so even people coming from other countries where they didn't necessarily think of themselves as black or white, as soon as you enter the United States, you have to declare, or it is declared for you, which one of these 2 groups you're closer to. And so your entire experience in the United States is tied to where you fall in this caste system. And so in the book, she talks about what the caste system is and how it affects or dictates our day-to-day lives. So she talks about the experiences of the subordinate and the dominant group in this country and why that is. And she talks about her own experiences as a black professional and the extreme discrimination that she has experienced. The fact that she is a black woman, a professional in her own right, but that when people see her, a lot of people, when they see her, the first thing they see and the only thing they see is that she's a black woman. So even though she has her accomplishments, she has her identification and her credentials to show what she has accomplished, the fact that she has her financial purchasing power to show that she can pay for where she is and what she wants to do, when people see her, a lot of people, all they see is a black woman. And so they immediately put her into the subordinate caste and assign servitude level to her. And so she talks about that, and it's a really heart-wrenching look at the reality of life in the caste system in this country. And she also compares it to the caste system in India, as well as the racial hierarchy that was set up in Nazi Germany. And so it is a very sad state of affairs, but one that is really, really necessary for everyone to read and acknowledge, so that we can make changes in our own space. So I read and talked about that. So again, you can see my earlier video for more thoughts. I also read Matthew McConaughey's memoir, Greenlights, and this was wonderful. This was Matthew McConaughey speaking in a real way about his experiences, about the notes that he's been taking in his notebook for decades, and some of the things that he has lived through. And so there are some really humorous stories that he shares in here. And it is a wonderful look at a man who is probably thought of as a sex symbol, but he reveals himself in an emotional way, in an intellectual way, and he talks about his family life and, you know, just the things that he's experienced and how they've shaped him. And so why he doesn't take life as seriously in some ways, and why he does take life really seriously in some places. And it's a wonderful read. It's a wonderful read. See my earlier video if you want to hear more complete thoughts about this book. I think that this is a book that everyone should read, whether you're a Matthew McConaughey fan, whether you like celebrity memoirs in general. This just has a lot of philosophy and thoughts. It also has a lot of pictures. I love this book. The last book that I have already spoken about but can't stop raving about, and so I won't stop talking about it. As Oak Flat by Lauren Redniss. This one is subtitled A Fight for Sacred Land in the American West. And Lauren Redniss is not Native American herself, but she's a Guggenheim Fellow, and I think she got a grant to research and write about this Apache tribe and their attempts at preserving the land that was given to them, or given to them to maintain. So it's not ownership. So some things that I learned about this book. So the Native Americans are put on reservations and they don't own the land. So they don't have deeds for the land. They are given stewardship, I suppose, over the land. But it's not really stewardship if you're not able to say what actually happens there. So in this book she talks about this specific piece of land in Arizona. And this Apache tribe considers this land to be sacred, and as luck would have it, copper ore has been discovered there, and so these multinational groups want to construct copper mines, and the Apaches, it's going to be a very invasive and disruptive process, and it would destroy the sacredness of the space. And so these Apaches are trying to petition the federal government to allow them to maintain stewardship of the land and be able to preserve what they use the land for. She's pulling down all the books off the shelves. Can you stop doing that? Can you stop doing that, please? Yeah, stop doing that. This was also a fantastically beautiful work of art, and so there are lots of drawings that accompany this story, and I love this book. So yeah, those are the 6 books that I already spoke about in earlier videos, and those are some of the best books that I read. No, I have other books. I also read The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind by William Kamkwamba. And William Kamkwamba grew up in Malawi, and his family, well, Malawi is a country in Africa. I don't know how much you know about Malawi, but a few years ago I had some friends from my church who went on a mission project to Malawi. So it was really interesting to see some of the stories that I heard from the friends who went on the mission trip being reflected through what I was reading in this book. So in this one, William Kamkwamba is a young boy, and his family, even though he's the only son and he's the person that they can only afford to send one of their children to school, he's the one who will go to school. The family is so poor that they can't afford to send him to school, and so he drops out of school because his parents can't pay the fees. And while he's out of school, he starts to read books from the local library, and he learns science principles, and he's able to build a windmill, and through building a windmill he builds other windmills, and he's able to power electricity to his home and eventually to power his home and his community. And it is a fantastic story because even though this boy doesn't get a lot of external help in the beginning, he's able to change his life and change the lives of all the people around him, and it is such a positive story, and I love this book. This was another gift from Doris from Aldi Books, and this was a young readers edition, and I loved reading it. There is another version that's more geared towards adults, but I think that this is the perfect way to communicate this story because this boy is a young boy when a lot of his story is happening. He's a teenager when he's building these windmills, and I don't know if, maybe I didn't mention it before, but he's building this windmill with scrap, rubbish. So he uses a half of a bicycle to get the electronic equipment that he needs for the windmill. So up on this windmill that he's building, it's pipes from PVC pipes that they have dug from the ground where people had irrigation, and they dig up the pipes that are no longer being used. So when I say scrap materials, I mean like garbage, things that, it's a fantastic story. And I hope everyone picks this book up and reads it. The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, William Kamkwamba, and his co-writer is Bryan. I also read Arrival of the Fittest, How Nature Innovates by Andreas Wagner. And this was my least favorite read of the month, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But this is another science evolution book. The birds on the front are a little bit misleading, so I thought that this was going to be about evolution of birds. It's not. It's about evolution in general. Andreas Wagner is an evolutionary biologist, and in this book he's trying to explain the missing pieces in Darwin's natural selection theory. So he talked about where Darwin took us to in that, the theory of natural selection and evolution. But he talked about how the science had not yet evolved to the point where Darwin would have had these steps to include in his theory. And so Wagner is trying to explain to us the steps and showing us Darwin's theory and proving it. Is that what he's doing? So I'm not really sure, because I didn't get everything in this book. I think maybe I could reread this book and probably get a little bit more from it. I don't want to say a lot of negative things about this book. The writing is in places a little obscure, and in places the analogies are really interesting, but you don't actually remember how they connect when it comes time to match them back up. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. So this is one of those books that I'm going to put in a side of the shelf for books that I want to reread, because I hope to get more from them. I'd love to know more about evolution and natural selection theory, and this book has such rave reviews, but I wasn't able to give it one myself. I read this Booker winner, 2006 Booker Prize winner, The Inheritance of Lost by Kieran Desai. This is a child. So I had these post-its on the back of my Booker winning books when I was filing them in date order. That's that shelf up there. But yeah, sometimes things get moved around. The Inheritance of Lost by Kieran Desai, 2006 Man Booker Prize winner, comparing the life of the Indian who leaves and goes abroad to the life of the Indian who is anglicized and lives in India. And so there are lots of examples of those parallels and contrasts and comparisons. And there's a love story, and there is a revolution happening, and there's a lot of beautiful things in this book. Kieran Desai is a mistress. She is really skilled at seeing the world and writing it down. So when she talks about the life of the Indian immigrant in New York, it feels like she's always lived in New York. And when she talks about the life of the expat living in India, it feels like she's always lived in India, and she's right there right now. And so it's great. It's a really great book. And I'm going to talk more about this one in a single book review for my Man Booker Prize winning series. So you'll hear me talk a little bit more about that book at that point. I also read What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Lesley. I'll put the name here because I don't remember the name offhand, and I don't have a note right here, and it's a name that I'm not sure how to pronounce. So this is a short story collection, and the author is Nigerian, and so she's writing about the experience of Nigerians. And so she talks about, I learned some history from reading this book, but she talks about the Biafran War, which I have seen mentioned so many times, and I never really looked up what the Biafran War was and what Biafra was. And so this made me go find that out and learn that Biafra, or the war, was about this group that wanted to secede, and the hardship of that war is that a lot of people, a lot of natives, a lot of children died from starvation because they were, the people in charge wanted to teach them a lesson. Okay, you can't take your own land, and so we're not going to allow any food to come to you. And so they let a lot of children die. And that was just, I mean, that was heartbreaking enough. But to read about how this author incorporated that into the stories was something else. And these stories they're so moving. They are so different. They're so moving. I loved this short story collection. I read an e-copy from my library, and I don't know what else this author has written, but I want to read it all. Glimmer As You Can by Danielle Martin was a gift from Alcove Press, and this one is set in 1962 in New York, in Brooklyn. We see the role that women play in society, the role that women are given, and how they perceive themselves. We see the changes that they want to make to their lives when they become dissatisfied with those roles. And so it was pretty groundbreaking what they tried to do. One of the women, we're following 3 women, did I mention that? And one of the women starts this social club, and we see just how that social club is perceived by the men in their life. And I love seeing how these women put the elevation of their friends' interests above their own, and how this community of women, how they supported each other, and in so doing, how they helped themselves. I love that. So this was another novel that I read and loved. I also read another novel from the publishers. This was Denise Hunter's Autumn Skies. This was the conclusion of a trilogy about 3 siblings who, after their parents die, they're trying to continue their parents' legacy of restoring and running this inn. And in the 3 books, each of the 3 siblings finds a romantic partner, and that relationship develops. This one, the conclusion was about the youngest sister, and she was pretty young, and so I wasn't sure how I would feel about this young girl finding forever love in her early 20s. But what's really great about this book, and the great thing about this series, is that Denise Hunter paints these characters as so individual, so much of themselves, that when she tells you that this young person is mature, she really sells you on their maturity. And so while Finding Forever Love was not for me at 22, I totally bought Grace falling in love in her early 20s and being ready for marriage. And so I love this. This series concluded just like it should have. I also probably didn't mention this was Christian romance. And I love how Denise Hunter writes Christian romance. Like, we see these characters, they go through their own struggles, but they are, at their center, they are connected to a higher power. Talk about relying on that strength when they have issues, and I love that. So yeah, I read 12 books because there are 11 here, plus the short story collection that I mentioned that I read in ebook format. And so those are the 12 books that I read in November. Would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Let me know what was the best book that you read in November, and what was the takeaway. Sell me on why I should add that book to my TBR as well if I haven't read it. So thank you so much for watching this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's chat in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.